operation. It's not clear how Mossad could have gotten in, even if they were agents inside Mossad, without having access to the building. Iranian government, the authorities are scrambling to find guilty. Iran's modus operandi is to always find someone to blame, allegedly a spy for Israel. I suspect that Iran may take its time with formulating the right response. If Israel turns back around, it will become much more difficult for Iran and its proxies. Two interesting things going on. One is the story that Haniyeh was killed with a missile. And if that is the case, if there was a missile strike on the house, then most likely the intelligence is the result of a mixture of signals intelligence, surveillance, and perhaps also human intelligence. But it does not necessarily lead to the conclusion that any particular person on the ground was responsible for that. Most likely, it was a combination of efforts. The other theory, which has dominated the New York Times coverage, is that supposedly Mossad, through its agents on the ground, planted a bomb that went undetected for several months inside the house, the guest house where he was staying, and that was only basically triggered when it was confirmed that Haniyeh would be staying there on such and such a date. Of course, it's not clear why the bomb was planted months back when no one knew who exactly would be staying there. Perhaps because that guest house is frequently visited by people like Haniyeh, and it could have been used for any operation at any time. It's also unclear whether how it would go, such a bomb would go undetected. But if this theory, if this story is accurate, then of course it leads to the conclusion that somebody human was at fault, either through negligence or through direct facilitation of this operation. It's not clear how Mossad could have gotten in, even if they were agents inside Mossad, without having access to that building, which means that those agents were people high up in the IRGC or other security services on the ground. There's a lot of questions about these stories. Probably we will not know the real situation for a long time. But what is interesting about the conclusion is that this story is clearly contributing to a sense of paranoia inside the Iranian government. The authorities are scrambling to find guilty parties. They are, first of all, terrified that there are major leaks, that their counterintelligence is a complete failure, and second, whether or not that is the case, there's clearly a sense that the fact that these narratives are, even if there was a strike and it had nothing to do with specific human failing, they also need someone to blame for the fact that the strike succeeded and caused a major embarrassment. So, regardless of who was actually at fault for this, Iran's modus operandi is to always find someone to blame, allegedly a spy for Israel, but that actually makes them look even weaker because now they're acknowledging that such people exist, and if they exist, they're disloyal. And if they're disloyal, why are they disloyal? Why are so many Mossad agents are constantly being arrested? So it actually works out not so well for their own image hunting for these Mossad agents, regardless of what actually happened and how this operation was successful. We have to admit that Israel has been exceptionally successful in Iran even before the separation. During a couple of years ago, under the Trump administration, when there was a series of ships being set on fire, Israel basically signaled to Iran that they could get anywhere inside the country. There have been other operations, successful assassination of nuclear scientists by Mossad going years back. and that level of penetration of intelligence, and of course, is well known. And of course, the stealing of the famous nuclear file, that also shows that Israel is able to access a very sensitive level of information, and they're quite well well aware of it. There's a huge network of facilitators because there's so many different demographics hugely dissatisfied with the regime for many different reasons. They're not all necessarily the same people or the same types of people, but they all have one thing in common. They believe that this regime should not exist, and this is why they're cooperating with a foreign power to provide intelligence, in some cases, even facilitate operations on the ground that could bring them to a very long and painful death if they are ever caught. Israel has sources clearly very high up in intelligence, in government, in all sorts of institutions. It doesn't always look like people imagine intelligence to work, that you have basically people cooperating with you willingly for whatever reason. Maybe at some points, these people may not even know that they're working with or for Israel, or that they're even working for anybody. They could be entangled in chance encounters with parties that they think are friendly. And this is how Israel can gain information and leverage over various government employees. Regardless, it's very obvious that Israel has enough information to be able to deal about the inside workings of the regime, to deal and the whereabouts of various officials, to deal a very painful blow to the government directly, should they so choose. They have been prevented from doing so by U.S. Policy, because such an act would be considered an act of war on a country. So they sent a very strong deterrence message by attacking one of the top level honored guests, and a very high level and important proxy for the regime right during the presidential inauguration. Haniyeh and his and other Hamas leaders are frequent visitors to Tehran. Israel could have taken him out at any other point, but they chose to do it at a particularly sensitive moment during the presidential inauguration, which in itself is a very strong strategic communication to Iran and to the world. Iran is facing a dilemma. If they don't respond in any significant way, the axis of resistance loses its what makes it work. It loses its ability, its bragging rights for the rest of the region, that they are successfully, essentially, succeeding in their plans to oust Israel from the region, to commit genocide, and so forth. But if they respond very openly, Iran knows its capabilities do not match Israel. They're concerned about US intervening in the case of a direct conflict. And they also don't necessarily want to show their hand and their capabilities until they're ready to do so. And this was clearly not a moment when they were prepared already. So I suspect that Iran may take its time with formulating the right response. It may engage in some semi-symbolic measures, such as the largely preventable strike, missile strike and drone strike in April, which was clearly, very constrained and clearly a test of different things, of its own capabilities, of defense mechanisms, of the economic impact, and so forth. But it was not necessarily there to drag Israel into a big direct confrontation. It may look for soft targets around the world, countries with significant Jewish or Israeli presence and sites, and embassies that have poor security. For instance, most recently, Iran threatened Argentina upon its commemoration of the Amir bombing 30 years ago, and said that they could basically attack Argentina at the time of their own choosing. So a country like that, that's dealing with an economic crisis that perhaps doesn't have the best security, would be a very obvious target, because then Israel could not be necessarily directly engaged in responding to something like that in another country, where that country bears the responsibility for a response. It could actually do similar operations, attacking embassies in different countries, preferably the less well guarded, the better. It could try to assassinate Israeli business people or officials, as it has tried in the past, so far unsuccessfully, um, and usually through proxies, through foreigners that it hired to do so. So it can have a range of responses, none of which would necessarily lead to a direct conflict with Israel. And I think Iran is going to continue looking for an opportunity to take its revenge at a later point, properly, when they feel that Israel is otherwise sufficiently weakened. But this decision by Israel to engage in this sort of very high level deterrence is huge optics for the international community, and I suspect that it will deal a blow not only to the immediate image of Iran not being able to protect its guests, but also to its information warfare campaign around the world, which sought to delegitimize and isolate Israel and to portray it as weak and unable to respond. And that actually fed into a lot of hostility and a lot of this international isolation. If Israel turns back around and is seen once again as prevailing, as being able to reveal Iran as a paper tiger, perhaps that too will become much more difficult for Iran and its proxies.